What's going on, everyone, and welcome to Movie Emporium's movie review of the Apple Plus original movie, Cherry. This movie, of course, is directed by the Russo brothers. Now, before we begin, if you like this channel, awesome, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium, hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like this video, awesome, hit that like button, as well as commenting below on any video to watch, including this one. So Cherry is a sprawling 140-minute movie where we basically get a character named the narrator who's given no name, but of course he's played by Tom Holland, and the narrator does exactly that. He narrates similar to, say, Robert De Niro or, any of these movies that Martin Scorsese does, where they basically narrate their entire life from point to point to point. So we see his life as a young, disenfranchised youth. He meets the love of his life named Emily. He goes to the military. He deals with PTSD. He deals with an opiate addiction where he ends up robbing banks. And it basically goes from point to point to point, basically going through his entire life. Every time he tries to get out of the darkness, he keeps getting pulled back in. It affects everyone around him. It's just the story of his life and how he kind of just went through some traumatic, events, whether it be in a war or, using heroin and so on and so forth. And that's pretty much it on the story synopsis. There's not really much else to tell because it's a pretty straightforward story about an individual who went down a downward spiral of just insanity and sadness and depression and so on and so forth. And this movie, as we can see, is very highly anticipated, believe it or not, because it has Tom Holland reuniting with the Russo brothers after Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. And the Russo brothers themselves have written stuff since then, but they haven't directed a full-length feature film since Avengers Endgame, so it's highly anticipated in that realm. But it also sees Tom Holland, after The Devil All the Time, doing a much more mature, much more dark, persona as an actor. So he's trying to kind of is trying to spread his wings from doing superhero movies and trying to do something different. And it's also an Oscar baity type movie in that way. So they're trying to throw him out into the wolves to see if he'll catch the bait, will catch it, and they'll be able to get that Oscar glory that Tom Holland, I'm sure, wants at some point in his career. So with all the kind of highly anticipated stuff and the synopsis out of the way, push that to the side for a second. Is this a movie that is not only worth your time, but is it worth the amount of money that Apple paid for it, which was $40 million, believe it or not? And with that said, I'm of two minds about this movie, to be fairly honest. The good stuff is Tom Holland by himself. He's an actor that is going to see some legitimate career-defining performances as he keeps moving along in his career, especially if he keeps doing stuff like this, where he keeps giving scripts that really define who he is. Because, when you get into stuff like the Marvel movies, there's a set directive and there's a set way that you're presenting yourself that is very different than, let's say, Devil All the Time and Cherry, where you're going into, especially in like Marvel movies, where it's a lighthearted and yes, there's some dimension and so on and so forth. But to go into these deep, dark personas, these deep, dark situations that he is having to go into this movie, he really shows his ability to be a very nuanced actor and a very nuanced professional when it comes to his ability to have an on-screen presence, have a creative way of doing things, and he's quite remarkable in this movie. This is as of right now his best performance I've ever seen him in, and he was in stuff like The Impossible and Devil All the Time. Impossible, he was amazing in. He's an actor that's so beloved but is so underappreciated for what he can do, that when you see his kind of shape-shifting as he does in this movie, from the disenfranchised youth, he's like 26 years old playing an 18-year-old, which is pretty funny, to like his time in the military, to his time when he becomes PST problems and the heroin addiction. It is such a well-balanced, well-developed performance that it's going to rise his status as an actor. It's pretty incredible what he does, and it's very emotional what he does. Like, everything about his performance in the movie just overshadows every single other person in this movie. Like, nobody has a chance to even shine because of what he's doing in the movie, and that's to his strengths. I think the Russo brothers really kind of found a meaty role for him, and like, here's a role that you have to go to some really dark places. We will help you get through this performance, but this is a performance that could lead you into some very big roles and later on maybe Oscar gold and stuff like that. And I appreciate that Tom Holland is not willing to settle on the Spider-Mans of the world. Yes, he's doing Uncharted, but he's willing to take chances like Robert Pattinson did, and willing to do those very dark material, very edgy kind of stuff to do. And that's not to take away from somebody like Ciara Bravo, who plays Emily, because she's also pretty decent, but she is more just his light, his tunnel, his way of seeing through the darkness and so on and so forth, even though she kind of gets addicted as well. And like I said, she brings a little bit of balance, but it's so hard to look past what Tom Holland's doing in this movie, that when these characters come around, especially like Jack Reynor and stuff like that, they don't feel well developed, and that's this movie's main problem, which I'll get into in a second. But I have to give credit to all the credit in the world for what the Russo brothers are having Tom Holland do in this movie, because it's completely different. He says a lot of curse words in this movie. He says the F word a lot. He goes to places that Spider-Man would blush every time he talks. And then he does some very violent and some disturbing stuff when it comes to being a junkie and so on and so forth. So that it's just an amazing performance. Whether it gets any Oscar nomination, glory, I don't know, because it doesn't come out till March, so we have to wait till next year. But it's something to look forward to, what he could do in the future. So. And so to talk about the other stuff that doesn't include Tom Holland, this is a movie that is not good. I'm going to be fairly honest. I've done like 3 takes of trying to figure out my best way to explain this movie. It's a movie that has a great middle act with the war scenes and the basic training and stuff like that. But everything that kind of bookends the front of this movie and the bookends of the last parts of this movie, or the ending, which is the last hour or whatever, it feels like a movie that is not entirely well written, or a movie that's entirely well developed. It has such great middle, but it has such lacking beginning and end, which is something that you rarely ever see. You usually see like a great beginning, maybe a great ending, but the middle usually suffers, because that's always the hardest part to write. And I never got on board with anything that was happening in this movie. If it weren't for Tom Holland, this movie would have completely fallen apart by the wayside. Nobody I can think of that is working in Hollywood right now can save what was going on in the first part of this movie and the last part of this movie, because it's so downtrodden and so depressing and just so bleak and dark, and every character is just miserable. And I was so sad and depressed. I need to go watch a comedy now, because I was just like, I understand what they're doing. I understand they're trying to show this kid's life. I know they're trying to show what happens when you try to be better, but everything just kicks you in the balls, basically. And every time a new character came on screen, or every time an older character came on screen that was part of the first act, I just completely was not on board with any of it. I completely lost interest in what Jack Reynor was doing, or any of the other actors in this movie were doing. The drug stuff is almost laughable sometimes. The robberies are just weird. Some of the shot photography and like the cinematography is making it out to be kind of like a dark fantasy, dark romantic movie in a lot of aspects. And I almost feel like sometimes like the way we see the drug-addled Tom Holland and Emily character feels just a little kind of cheesy, I guess you could say. It's a movie that really tries to be an interesting, kind of thought-provoking movie with a lot of, deep, dark things. But it just doesn't work. I don't know. This is one of those disappointing movies that kind of makes me worried about the Russo brothers in general as directors, because I think when you're under the tutelage of something like Kevin Feige, and you have great screenwriters like they had for Avengers, and you have like the cast that can pretty much do whatever they need to do to make the movie great, I just question whether they can be on their own. I really do. If this is their first movie out of the MCU, I worry that this is just not going to be a good career for them, and they're going to end up back at the MCU just to save their career and stuff like that. And maybe I'm just kind of thinking or whatever, but this movie just is rough in a lot of places. And once again, this is on a streaming service, and the streaming services are allowing these movies to be as long as they need, or as long as the director wants. And, as great as The Irishman was, like I said before, it could have been cut down. And it's the same thing here. It didn't need to be 2 hours and 20 minutes. You could have cut it down to an hour and 50, 2 hours at max, and been just fine. And actually probably made it a better movie. But yeah, it's a pretty big disappointment of a movie that has a great middle act, and it suffers everywhere else. Like I said, when the drug stuff starts happening, it's just like, oh God, I just can't. I just really can't. And the trailer makes the movie look way better than it is, which ends up being like a complete bore in a lot of places too. So it's unfortunate, but you know what? At least it has a good middle act, and at least has Tom Holland doing some great work. So I guess that's something to look forward to if you have any interest in seeing this movie. But anyways, that'll do it. That'll be my take on this movie, Cherry. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below when this movie eventually comes out. I think March 12th or something like that. Are you interested in seeing this movie? Have you seen this movie? What did you think about it? If you've seen this movie, don't spoil it. Just tell me what you thought of the movie. Did you like it? Did you not like it? All that good stuff. But otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, hit the subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find out what's coming next. If you liked the video, awesome. Hit that like button. And as always, we'll see you guys on the next video. Peace out.